Okay, so have you ever had this thought like you're really interested in a famous philosopher, someone who had a huge impact, but then you see their collected works?
Oh, yeah.
And it's intimidating, right? I mean, it's practically a whole library in
Oh, it
itself.
can be very daunting.
It feels like you'd need some kind of, like a cheat sheet or a decoder ring just to grasp the basics.
A secret handshake.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
Well, today we're going to try and hand you that decoder ring. We're offering a deep dive into a really fascinating and influential thinker, Fakhr al-Rasi.
A brilliant mind and a really pivotal figure in what scholars call post-classical Islamic thought.
So al-Razi lived from 1149 to 1210, and he was not the kind of philosopher who just sat around,
Mhm.
repeating what everyone else had said.
No, not at all.
He was really engaged with his predecessors, especially Ibn Sina. You might know him better as Avicenna.
Hmm?
A lot of al-Razi's work is actually dedicated to directly responding to and critiquing Ibn Sina's ideas.
He really pushes back and develops his own unique perspectives. It's one of the things that makes him so interesting.
And here's the thing. Prolific doesn't even begin to describe al-Razi. I mean, this guy wrote on just about everything. Philosophy, Islamic law, theology. He even got into astrology.
His work is incredibly expensive.
And his commentary on the Quran, oh my goodness, it's legendary. It's so comprehensive and detailed that there's this joke that it covers every single topic imaginable except the actual Quranic verses themselves.
I've heard that one,
Yeah.
but it really gets to the heart of his approach.
Right. Even when he's writing on these other topics, his philosophical mind is always shining through.
Exactly. It's all connected.
So, what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to try to cut through the sheer volume of al-Razi's work and distill some of his most significant philosophical insights. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has a fantastic entry on him, and it's been so helpful in preparing for this deep dive.
It's a great resource.
We'll be looking at his ideas about logic, epistemology, physics, and metaphysics,
Yeah.
all the good stuff. Plus, his take on psychology and ethics. We're basically giving you the guided tour through the intellectual landscape of al-Razi.
All the highlights.
Exactly. So, let's get started, shall we? Let's jump into the world of logic and epistemology, how al-Razi approached the very foundations of knowledge and reasoning. It's a good place to begin.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because Al-Razi actually restructured how we think about logic in a very fundamental way.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, think about this. Aristotle and even Ibn Sina, to a large degree, structured logic around the different categories and forms of arguments. But Al-Razi said, hold on a second. There are two even more basic ways that we acquire knowledge, and that should be our starting point.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What were these two ways?
He called them ta'or, which is usually translated as conceptualization, and tadik, which is assent.
Hmm. Okay.
Oh.
That's interesting. I mean, those sound kind of familiar, but can you unpack those terms a bit more?
Yeah, sure. So conceptualization, that's basically like forming a concept in your mind.
Yeah.
You grasp the idea of something like justice or gravity. It's that initial understanding without necessarily making any judgment about whether it exists in a particular way in the real world.
Okay, I think I get that.
Yeah.
So it's the first step, like grasping the meaning of a word or the basic idea behind a concept.
Right, exactly. And then you have assent. That's when you take that concept and you go a step further. You affirm a statement about it. You agree with a proposition like justice is essential for a stable society or gravity makes apples fall. You're making a judgment about the truth or falsity of that statement.
I see. So conceptualization is like getting a mental handle on the idea, and assent is taking a stance on it, saying, yeah, I agree with that, or no, I don't think that's right.
That's a really good way to put it. And what Al-Razi was suggesting is that the real foundation of logic isn't just about the structure of arguments. It's about these two fundamental ways we come to know and affirm things. It's about how those building blocks of knowledge actually work.
That makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
I can see how that would have a big impact on how you approach logic as a whole.
Oh, it absolutely did. Some scholars argue that Al-Razi's focus on Tower and Tadik really influenced later thinkers to broaden the scope of logic to encompass not just the forms of arguments, but the very nature of concepts and judgments themselves.
Wow, that's impressive. But al-Razi didn't stop there, did he? He also had some pretty strong critiques of definitions themselves.
He did. And this gets right to the heart of some long-standing debates in philosophy going all the way back to Aristotle.
So we're talking about the classic idea of essential definitions, right? The idea that everything has a set of defining characteristics that make it what it is.
Exactly. Think about the definition of water. A colorless, odorless, tasteless liquid composed of hydrogen and oxygen. That's getting at its essence, right? What makes water water?
Yeah, that's the classic example. And even Sina really ran with this idea from Aristotle. He thought essential definitions were crucial for understanding the world.
He did, but Al-Razi had a different take on this.
Oh.
He argued that when we come up with definitions like that for water, what we're really doing is just explaining what we already mean by the word water. He called these nominal definitions. We're not really uncovering some hidden essence of water itself, we're just clarifying how we use the term.
So it's more about language than about uncovering the true nature of things.
Exactly. It's a matter of convention and how we've agreed to use words.
Okay, that's an interesting distinction. And Al-Razi had a pretty powerful argument to support this view. He brought back a classic philosophical puzzle into the discussion, Medino's paradox.
Meno's paradox. Oh, that's a good one. It's a real head scratcher.
It is. So for those who might not be familiar, can you remind us what Medino's paradox is and how Al-Razi used it to critique essential definitions?
Okay, so imagine you're trying to learn about something new. Let's say virtue. You want to figure out what virtue really is. But Meno's paradox asks, how can you even search for something if you have absolutely no idea what it is? Like if you have zero concept of virtue, how do you even know where to begin looking?
Right. It'd be like trying to find a specific book in a giant library without knowing the title, the author, or even what the book is about. You'd be wandering around aimlessly.
Exactly. But here's the other side of the paradox. If you do already have some understanding of virtue, some grasp of what it is, then what's the point of searching? You're essentially just trying to rediscover something you already know in some way.
Ah, I see. So you're either completely lost or you're just going in circles.
Precisely. And philosophers like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina tried to get around this paradox by saying that, well, we can know something in a general sense without knowing its specific nature. So maybe we have a vague idea of virtue, but we want to know its precise definition.
Right. Like we know it has something to do with being a good person, but we want to get clearer on what that actually means.
Yeah, exactly. But Al-Razi was not convinced by that solution at all. He argued that this just pushes the problem back a step. You could apply the same dilemma to that initial general knowledge. If you don't know that clearly enough, you can't really inquire further. But if you do know it clearly enough, then again, what's the point of inquiring?
So for Al-Razi, there's no real escape from this dilemma. He saw it as a fundamental limitation on our ability to acquire knowledge about essences through definitions.
That's one way to interpret his view. And it definitely had implications for his stance on another big debate in epistemology, the distinction between necessary and acquired knowledge.
Ah, yes, that classic distinction. So refresh our memory, what are we talking about here?
Right, so this distinction was especially important in Kalam, which is Islamic theology. Necessary knowledge was seen as the kind of knowledge that's immediately evident to us, things we can't deny, like basic logical truth, one is less than two, that kind of thing.
Got it. So it's knowledge that's self-evident or maybe even innate.
Right. And then you have acquired knowledge. This was the knowledge that you had to work for. It was the knowledge gained through reasoning, investigation, experience, observation, that sort of thing.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's the knowledge we actively go out and get.
Yeah. But then Al-Razi comes along and basically throws a wrench into this whole framework.
Really? What did he do?
He essentially rejected the very idea that we can acquire knowledge through our own efforts in the way it was traditionally understood.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
So how did he think we get knowledge then?
He proposed a pretty radical idea. He said that ultimately all of our knowledge, both our basic understanding and our more complex beliefs, it's all a gift from God.
Wow, that's a big claim. It's like saying we don't really learn things ourselves, we just receive them from a higher power.
That's the gist of it. And this idea makes a lot of sense within the Asharite school of Islamic theology, which Al-Razi belonged to. The Asharites believed in occasionalism, which is a view that God is the direct cause of everything that happens in the universe, including our thoughts and beliefs. So for them, there's no real independent causal power in created things, even in something like the human intellect.
So instead of actively acquiring knowledge, we're passively receiving it from God.
Right. It's divinely given knowledge, not something we consciously choose or control.
That's fascinating. And it raises all sorts of questions. I mean, what exactly is the scope of this divinely given knowledge? Is it limited to just sensory experience? Or could it extend a deeper understanding of reality itself?
Those are great questions, and scholars have debated this. Some argue that Al-Razi thought our knowledge was primarily confined to the phenomenal world, to how things appear to us. Others say no, he believed this divinely given knowledge could, in principle, extend to the nature of things as they are in themselves.
So there's room for interpretation. It's a really subtle point. But here's what I find puzzling. If Al-Razi downplayed the role of human agency in acquiring knowledge, why did he go to such great lengths to explore all the different ways we form beliefs and make judgments?
That's a really good point. It might seem contradictory on the surface, but remember, even if the ultimate source of knowledge is God, understanding the mechanisms of how we come to hold beliefs is still a valuable philosophical project.
Right. It's like saying, okay, so God created the universe, but we can still study physics and figure out how the laws of nature work.
Exactly. And Al-Razi did exactly that. He made some really important contributions to Avicenna logic. He introduced new distinctions, refined existing concepts. Some scholars even call his work in this area revisionist Avicenna logic.
Revisionist Avicennan logic. Interesting. Can you give some examples of these distinctions he made?
One that comes to mind is his clarification of the difference between aliwivic and temporal necessity.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm familiar with those terms. Break it down for us.
So Al-Razi pointed out that saying every A is necessarily B is not the same thing as saying every A is always B.
Okay. I think I see the difference there.
The first statement, that's alithic necessity, it's about a logical or essential connection between A and B. It must be the case by its very nature. Like a triangle must have three sides. That's an essential property.
Yeah, it can't be any other way.
Exactly. But the second statement, every A is always B, that's temporal necessity. It means that whenever A exists, B also exists. It's a statement about how things are in the world, not about some inherent logical connection.
So it's possible that something is always the case without it being absolutely necessary.
Exactly. Like maybe all the swans we've ever seen are white, but that doesn't mean it's logically impossible for a black swan to exist.
Right, right. It just means we haven't encountered one yet.
That's a great example. And Al-Razi's point was that Ibn Sina kind of blurred these two types of necessity together.
So Al-Razi was making the system more precise.
Exactly. And that led to a more nuanced understanding of different kinds of propositions.
Okay, I can see how that would be important for logic. And you mentioned there were other distinctions Al-Razi made. What else comes to mind?
Well, this one's a bit more technical, but it's really interesting. He drew a distinction between two ways of interpreting the subject term of a proposition. He called them the externalist reading and the essentialist reading.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So let's take a proposition like, every human is mortal. An externalist reading of every human would take it to mean all the actual individual humans that exist in the world. So the statement is saying that every single one of those humans is mortal.
Makes sense. So it's a claim about concrete individuals.
Right. But an essentialist reading of every human takes it to mean everything that could be classified as human, including hypothetical or possible humans. So even if there were some human-like beings on another planet, they would also be covered by the statement, every human is mortal.
It's like it's talking about the concept of human itself, not just the specific humans that happen to exist right now.
Exactly. And Al-Razi argued that these two readings could lead to very different interpretations of the same proposition.
That's a subtle but important point. It's about the scope of the claim. Is it about actual individuals or about a broader category?
Precisely. And this distinction actually connects back to what earlier philosophers like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina were saying about the scope of the subject term.
How so?
Well, Al-Farabi had this idea that the subject term could refer to everything that's possibly a member of that category. Ibn Sina's view was more restricted. He thought it primarily referred to what's actually a member of the category, including things that exist in our minds as concepts.
So Al-Razi's distinction might have been a way of further refining and clarifying these earlier views.
It's possible. And it's especially interesting given Al-Razi's later arguments against the very idea of mental existence, which we'll get to in a bit.
Okay, I'm making a mental note of that. We definitely need to circle back to that. So it's clear that even in logic, which can seem like a very abstract field, Al-Razi was really pushing the boundaries of thought.
Absolutely. He was not content with just accepting what had been said before. He was always looking for ways to make things clearer, more precise, and more rigorous.
Right. It's like he was saying, okay, so this is what you guys have come up with so far, but let me poke and prod at it a bit and see if we can make it even better.
That's a great way to put it. And this critical and creative spirit is evident in his approach to physics as well. Let's shift gears a bit and explore how he tackled some of the fundamental questions about the nature of the physical world.
Okay, sounds good. So where do we begin?
Well, it's important to remember that Al-Razi was working within a rich intellectual tradition. He was engaging with the ideas of Aristotle and Ibn Sina, of course, but he was also deeply influenced by the Kalam tradition in Islamic theology. And these different traditions sometimes pulled him in different directions.
I can imagine that leading to some interesting tensions. So what were some of the key topics in physics that Al-Razi explored?
Well, he was interested in many of the same fundamental questions that had occupied Aristotle and Ibn Sina. The nature of body and motion, time, place, void, all that good stuff. But his approach was often filtered through the lens of Kalam, and that led to some unique insights and arguments.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, sure. His take on atomism is a perfect case study.
Atomism versus continuism. That's a debate that's been going on for centuries.
It really has. So, continuism championed by Aristotle and Ibn Sina holds that matter is infinitely divisible. You can keep dividing a piece of matter into smaller and smaller parts, and you'll never reach a point where you can't divide it any further.
Right. It's like that saying, you can always cut a piece of cake in half.
Yeah.
There's always another half to cut.
Exactly. But atomism, which was central to Men-Kalam schools, argued that no matter is ultimately made up of these indivisible particles called atoms. And these atoms can't be cut in half or broken down any further. They're the fundamental building blocks of matter.
And this is where al-Razi's engagement with both philosophical and theological ideas gets really interesting, because his stance on atomism wasn't entirely clear-cut.
Yeah, that's one of the puzzles when studying al-Razi. He seemed to have different opinions depending on what he was writing and when he was writing it.
So what was the breakdown?
In his works that were more explicitly philosophical, he seemed to lean towards rejecting atomism.
Okay.
But in his Kalam writings, he seemed to be more open to it.
That's so interesting. So he was willing to shift his perspective depending on the context.
It seems that way. And some scholars even suggest that in his final Summa, his big comprehensive work called Al-Man'alib, he might have settled on a more definitively atomist view.
Okay, so it sounds like he was really wrestling with this issue throughout his career.
Yeah.
What were some of the arguments he used to support atomism when he did endorse it?
One of his main arguments was that if continuism were true, if matter were infinitely divisible, then a tiny mustard seed would theoretically contain an infinite number of parts.
Infinite parts in a tiny seed. That seems like a bit of a stretch.
Right. And al-Razi's point was that if a mustard seed contains infinite parts, then it could potentially be equivalent in size to the entire universe.
That's quite a paradox.
Exactly. He saw that as a reductio ad absurdum argument against continuism. It just leads to conclusions that are too absurd to accept.
Okay. That's a pretty clever argument. Did
Yeah.
he have any others?
He did. He also presented a geometrical argument that I find really fascinating.
Oh, lay it on us.
So imagine you have a perfectly smooth sphere and you touch it to a perfectly flat plane surface.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now, according to al-Razi, their point of contact would have to be an indivisible point.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Right. There's no way to divide that point of contact into smaller parts. It's just a single point.
Okay, so al-Razi was using this to argue that there must be indivisible units of matter.
Exactly. He saw it as further evidence for atomism, and it's important to keep in mind that these atoms he was talking about weren't necessarily conceived as tiny little physical particles like the atoms we think of today.
Oh, really? How were they conceived then?
They were more like geometrical points, indivisible units of space. And this actually reflects the influence of Kalam atomism, which tended to have a more abstract and mathematical conception of atoms.
That's so interesting. It's a reminder that the concept of atom has evolved quite a bit over time.
It definitely has.
Mm.
But given al-Razi's inclination towards atomism, it's not surprising that he was also a strong supporter of the existence of a void.
Right, the void, that empty space that Aristotle and Ibn Sina said couldn't exist.
Exactly. And al-Razi took them head on this issue. He argued that a void is not only possible, but that there's actually evidence for it in the physical world.
Evidence for the void. What kind of evidence?
Well, he pointed to simple things, like if you have two flat surfaces and you pull them apart, there has to be a moment, however brief, where there's nothing between them before air rushes in to fill the gap.
Ah, that makes sense. It's like a tiny fleeting void.
Exactly. And al-Razi argued that this was enough to demonstrate that a void isn't some logical impossibility, as Aristotle had claimed.
Okay, that's a pretty intuitive argument. I like it.
Yeah.
But how did al-Razi define the void more precisely?
He actually offered two main definitions. One was that a void is a space between two bodies that aren't in contact, and that space is completely empty of anything else. So it's a very specific kind of emptiness between things.
Okay, that's a very literal and spatial understanding of void.
Right. But he also gave a more general definition. He said a void is simply a region of space that contains absolutely nothing. So it's not necessarily defined by its relation to bodies, it's just pure emptiness.
Interesting. So there's a void between my hands when I clap them together?
Mm-hmm.
But there could also be a void way out in the cosmos where there are no stars or planets or anything at all.
Exactly. And Al-Razi's willingness to entertain this more general definition of void actually connects to his understanding of place, which was quite different from Ibn Sina's.
Ah, yes. I remember we touched on this earlier. So, refresh our memory. How did they disagree about place?
Well, Ibn Sina, following in Aristotle's footsteps, defined place as the inner boundary of the body that contains something. So the place of the water is the inside of the glass.
Okay, so place is defined by the container.
Precisely. But Arazi was very critical of this container-based view of place. He argued that place, or as he often called it, space, fatais, it exists independently of any objects that occupy it.
Hmm. Okay, so it's not about the boundaries of things. It's more like an independent background or stage where things happen.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, he gave a really helpful example. Imagine you have a jewel inside a bag and you're carrying that bag from one location to another.
Okay, I'm visualizing it.
Now, the jewel stays in the same place relative to the bag, even though the entire bag is moving.
Right, it's not like the jewel's bouncing around inside the bag as I walk.
Exactly. So for Al-Razi, the space that the jewel occupies that place, it's a real thing even when the bag isn't there. It's not dependent on the bag for its existence.
I see. So it's like saying the space in my room exists whether or not I have furniture in it. The space is there regardless of what's occupying it.
That's a great analogy. And this independent conception of space actually helped to clarify his arguments for the void. If space exists independently of bodies, then it's much easier to conceive of empty space, a void that's not defined by the boundaries of things.
Okay, that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
And this idea of independent space also reminds me of how Al-Razi approached time. He had some interesting views on that as well, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. Time was another area where he diverged from Ibn Sina and really developed his own unique perspective.
So, as a refresher, how did Ibn Sina understand time?
Ibn Sina, again, following Aristotle, pretty closely thought of time as essentially a measure of motion. Specifically, he focused on the regular motion of the celestial spheres as the primary way we measure time.
Okay, so time is like a ruler that we use to track the movement of the heavens.
Right. But Al-Razi didn't fully buy into this motion-based view of time. And what's fascinating is that his views on time actually seem to have evolved throughout his intellectual career.
Really? That's interesting. Can you walk us through that evolution?
Sure. So in one of his early works, The Mabuth, he's pretty upfront about his uncertainty. He says straight out that he hasn't reached a definitive conclusion about the nature of time.
So he's open to different possibilities at this point.
Exactly. But later on in his Mulaka, he seems to lean toward the idea that concepts like beforeness and afterness are more like items of consideration.
Items of consideration. What do you think he meant by that?
It's a bit cryptic, but some scholars interpret it as suggesting that these temporal concepts might exist primarily in our minds as ways of organizing our experience.
So it's like we impose these categories before and after onto the world.
It's possible. But then by the time he wrote his massive Al-Malib, his final Summa, he'd adopted a more robust view of time. He called it a Platonic view, suggesting that time is a self-subsisting substance existing independently of the physical world and of our minds.
So time is its own thing, not just a measure of something else.
Right. And it's likely that he was influenced in this by an earlier philosopher, Abu Bakr al-Razi. But there's a key difference between the two al-Razis.
What's the difference?
Well, Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, the one we're talking about today, he was very clear that both time and place are created by God. They're not eternal principles like Plato might have suggested.
Okay, so he's bringing in that theological perspective again.
Exactly. He's integrating his philosophical ideas with his theological commitments.
It's fascinating to see how these different strands of thought weave together in his work. So we've covered a lot of ground with Al-Razi's physics, from atomism and the void to his unique views on space and time. And I think it's safe to say that he was far from a passive recipient of earlier ideas.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He was actively engaging with questioning, reinterpreting, and sometimes outright rejecting the ideas of those who came before him.
Right, he was very much his own thinker. Now let's move on to another really big and complex area of philosophy: metaphysics, the exploration of the fundamental nature of reality.
Metaphysics. This is where things get really deep.
It is. And it's here that we see a major shift in focus, from Aristotle's emphasis on substance to Ibn Sina's focus on existence. Ibn Sina's metaphysical system really set the stage for a lot of the debates that Al-Razi engaged with.
Definitely. And two of Ibn Sina's most influential ideas were his distinction between essence and existence, and his argument for God as being identical with his own existence. These became major flashpoints in later Islamic thought.
So before we dive into al-Razi's responses, can we do a quick recap of what Ibn Sina was arguing here? What exactly did he mean by essence and existence, and why did he think they were identical in God?
Okay, so for Ibn Sina, essence refers to what a thing is fundamentally, its inherent nature, its definition. It's what makes a thing the kind of thing it is. So the essence of a triangle is to be a three-sided closed figure. That's what defines it.
Got it. So essence is like the blueprint or the recipe for a thing.
Right. And then you have existence, which is simply the fact that something is that it has being in the world. So a triangle can have an essence even if no triangles actually exist.
Okay, that's an important distinction.
Yeah.
So the concept of a triangle can exist in our minds even if there are no physical triangles out there in the world.
Exactly. And Ibn Sina famously argued for this distinction between essence and existence using what's called the conceivability argument.
Ah, yes, the conceivability argument. Remind us how that works.
It's pretty simple but powerful.
Mm-hmm.
He said, look, we can conceive of things perfectly clearly without knowing whether or not they actually exist. Take a unicorn, for example. I can imagine a unicorn understand its essence. You know, a horse with a single spiral horn without knowing whether or not unicorns actually exist.
Right, it's perfectly conceivable, but that doesn't mean they're real.
Exactly. So Ibn Sina concluded that if we can conceive of the essence of something without knowing whether it exists, then existence must be something separate from essence. It's an additional ingredient that has to be added to the essence for something to actually be in the world.
Okay, that's a pretty persuasive argument. So we can imagine a unicorn without believing in unicorns. But why did Ibn Sina think that essence and existence were identical in God?
Well, this gets to the heart of his understanding of God as the necessary existent. For Ibn Sina, God is the only being whose existence is absolutely necessary. God cannot not exist.
Right, God is existence itself.
Exactly. And Ibn Sina argued that if there were any kind of distinction or separation within God, even between his essence and his existence, then it would be at least conceivable for those aspects to be separate.
Okay, so if God's essence and existence were distinct, then hypothetically speaking, they could be pulled apart.
Right. And that would mean that God's existence wouldn't be absolutely necessary. It would be contingent on something else holding those two aspects together.
I see. So to guarantee God's absolute necessity, Ibn Sina had to say that in God, essence and existence are one and the same. There's no separation, no distinction, no possibility of them being apart.
Exactly. It's a really subtle and complex argument, but it was central to his whole metaphysical system.
It's definitely one of those ideas that makes you really stop and think. Okay, so that's Ibn Sina's view. Now, where does al-Razi fit into all of this?
Well, this is where things get even more interesting because, as you might expect, al-Razi didn't just accept Ibn Sina's ideas wholesale. He had some major objections, particularly when it came to God.
Okay, I'm ready for the fireworks. Let's hear it.
So remember how Ibn Sina's distinction between essence and existence sparked this debate about whether that distinction was a real feature of reality or just a conceptual distinction in our minds?
Yeah, real versus conceptual. That's a recurring theme in philosophy.
It is. And al-Razi was firmly on the side of the realists. He argued that essence and existence are truly distinct aspects of reality, not just mental constructs.
So he's saying it's not just a matter of how we think about things. It's a real metaphysical distinction.
Exactly. But this raised a tricky question. If essence and existence are really distinct, does that mean that essences have some kind of being even before they come into existence? Like, are their essences just floating around waiting to be actualized?
That's a good question. It sounds a bit like Plato's theory of forms.
It does a bit. But al-Razi was careful to avoid that kind of Platonism. He said no essences don't exist in some separate realm before becoming actualized. But he did maintain that essence as such has a kind of priority over existence. He said that considered in itself, essence is in a neutral state, neither existent nor non-existent.
A neutral state. Neither existent nor non-existent.
Mm.
That's a tough one to wrap your head around.
It is. It's a very subtle metaphysical concept. But essentially what he's saying is that essence is logically prior to existence. You have to have the concept of something, its essence, before you can even talk about whether or not it exists.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So it's not that essences are hanging out somewhere waiting to become real. It's more like they're a necessary precondition for existence.
Right. And al-Razi agreed with Ibn Sina that in the realm of existing things, every instance of an essence is also an instance of existence. But he insisted that this priority of essence is a real feature of reality, not just a conceptual distinction.
Okay, that's a subtle but important point. So al-Razi agreed with Ibn Sina that everything that exists has both an essence and an existence, but he disagreed about which one was more fundamental.
Exactly. And this difference in perspective becomes really clear when they talk about God.
Ah, yes, God. The ultimate metaphysical conundrum.
Yeah.
So, how did their views on God differ?
Well, Ibn Sina, as we discussed, argued that in God, essence and existence are absolutely identical. There's no distinction between them whatsoever. But Al-Razi rejected this idea outright, and his rejection stemmed from his commitment to the univocity of existence.
The univocity of existence. Okay, that's a new one for me. What's that all about?
It's the idea that the concept of existence is fundamentally the same no matter what we're talking about. Whether it's a rock, a tree, a human being, or God, existence means the same thing in all those cases.
So, there's not a special kind of divine existence that's different from the existence of created things.
Exactly. And Al-Razi thought that Ibn Sina's view implied that God